So today we are honored to welcome Professor Jordan as she presents her work and insights into her photographic practice. She's a Brooklyn-based photo artist who describes her work as finding the odd in the ordinary, bringing everyday objects and landscapes to life through light and color. Her photography has been exhibited internationally, published in outlets such as The New Yorker and Teen Vogue, and recognized with awards including the Gordon Parks Foundation Scholarship and the 2024 Feature Shoot Emerging Photography Award. Alongside her professional work, she has been teaching photography at FIT, where she inspires the next generation of image makers. So welcome, Professor Jordan.
Thank you, Leticia. All right, hi guys. I wanted to start a little bit earlier, like a few minutes earlier today, because I have a tendency to talk over. I just want to ask that we all hold our questions until the end. I'll make sure to give at least 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes to answer some questions. And then after class, I can stay too if you want to come up and ask me any questions individually. As I go through my presentation, to keep your homework assignment in mind, the image response that I'll ask that you all make to my talk is really broad. It can be anything that you want it to be. It's not going to be specific to portraiture or landscape or anything like that, so long as it's inspired by something that I show or talk about today. So I want it to be really wide open in terms of what you can make. So in my talk, I like to kind of go through the whole kind of like span of my creative life thus far, going all the way back to when I was a kid. So I hope that you enjoy this talk. So I'm gonna go all the way back to the very beginning. So I am the oldest of 3 girls, and my mom, pictured here in this photograph, was our family photographer. So growing up, photography was always around me in many different spaces in terms of my home life with my parents, and then also my grandparents on either side of my family. So this here is my mom, again, like I said, and she would give me and my 2 younger sisters disposable cameras to play around with all the time. And so this photograph arguably was taken by myself or my middle sister of my mom in our kitchen with one of her film cameras. And this film camera my mom later went on to give me when I was a teenager, which I made my first film photographs on. And then these 2 photographs here, the one on the left is a photograph that my mom took of my sister on her birthday, and that's me behind her with a camera when I was about 5 years old. And then a few years ago only, I kind of put 2 and 2 together that this image on the right of my mom was actually taken by me when I was about 5 years old. And so I would say that this is probably like the first photograph I ever took in my life. And something that I always like to kind of express or say when I show this image is that if you point your camera at what you love, it's very hard for you to go wrong and to make a bad picture. And I feel like that's something that I'm always kind of striving after in my work. And unknowingly, I was doing that as a toddler. So my mom's mom, my Nana, is honestly like one of the biggest inspirations for me in my life. She is an artist, and she's also been an artist since she was a kid. So on the far left, this is my Nana when she was a child in the 1930s. In the middle, that's her. That's an image of her from her high school yearbook drawing in art class. And then on the right, that's my Nana in her home studio, either in the late 70s or the early 80s, making art. And so my Nana has been an artist her entire life, and she really instilled that in me and my siblings. This is a spread of some of my Nana's artwork that I just have in my apartment. She does a lot of paintings, drawings, screen printings, wood blocks, and a lot of her work was of women and children, flora and fauna. And so for me, I feel like as I'm growing older and making more work, I feel like I've always been sort of subconsciously in conversation with my Nana's artwork in terms of the subject matter that I document in my work as well. This is a newspaper clipping that my Nana pasted into one of her scrapbooks that I found a few years ago. And something I really love about this is how it says, Jean Van Apeldoorn, a working artist. And I feel like very lucky to have grown up in a family where the starving artist trope was never one that was mentioned or talked about. And me and my sisters were all artists in our own right in different mediums. And our parents have always really encouraged that as a path in our lives. And in large part, I think it's due to the presence of my Nana as an artist who helped raise a family on the salary of an art teacher and someone who would sell her artwork in shows as well. So my Nana and my Papa, this is my Papa right here. So he was a plumber, which is not artistic in any way, shape, or form. But he, along with one of his brothers and his father, built the house that my Nana still lives in to this day, and that my mom was born and raised in. And I spent so much of my childhood and still time when I go home in. So this place was always just pure magic to me from the time I formed consciousness. These are two images taken a few years apart of me and one of my sisters at Nana's kitchen table making art with her. And this was always what we did when we were with her. We would spend time at the table painting and drawing. We would make fairy houses out of moss and cardboard, and we would make scarecrows for her garden. And another thing that was so special about Nana's house was this box that she had underneath her couch, which is still there. So next to paper dolls and dust bunnies, there was this old tea tin that was full of these photographs of my mom and her siblings growing up, and my Nana and Papa when they were children and when they were newlyweds. And I loved looking through this box at these photographs of my family members, especially because I'm sitting in the very rooms that these photographs were made in. So this image here on the left of my Papa pretending to be asleep with two of my aunts is in the front room of the house that I have spent every Christmas of my life in. And then on the right, that's my Nana in her kitchen. And those windows look out at her gardens, and we've, spent many evenings in this kitchen with her. It's the same room that those photographs of me and my sister at the kitchen table were taken in. And I really just loved, these really interesting compositions and scenes that my family members chose to document. These are just what we call vernacular photography, family photographs. But for me, there was something so magical and beautiful about them, whether it be the colors or the light or just the subject matter of the images. And so long before I even started making photographs, I knew that one day I wanted to have this box of photographs under my couch that I could pull out and show people, my life and the people who had come and gone from it, the people who I loved and places I'd been. And this was really kind of the first introduction to photography that I ever had. This photograph I found when I was a college student here. And it was a slide that my great-grandfather had taken of my great-grandmother in her front yard with her rose bush and two of my aunts. And to me, I just feel like it's just such a beautiful photograph. And maybe I'm biased because they're my family members, but I think there's just something so beautiful to these images. And I always go back to them in times when I'm looking and seeking inspiration. Even though my work is very much not documentary, which you'll come on to see, this is jumping a bit ahead in time, but I made this photograph of my Nana in her garden in the summer of 2019, and I like to call it a portrait of her, even though it doesn't show her face. She's right-handed, so all of the art she's ever made has been with this hand, and she has taught me so much of what we can do with our hands alone. And so this image is really special to me because of who it's of, but also the place that we made it in. And then on the opposite side of my family, my dad's family, there's less photographs that exist, but there are a few that are really special to me, and they come from my grandfather's family archive. So this photograph is of my grandfather when he was a child. And this and the next few slides were all taken by his older brother, my great uncle, when he was a teenager. And I started making photographs when I was a teenager, about 15 or 16 years old. And so looking at these photographs taken by someone in my family when he himself was a teenager as well is just really inspiring to me, because typically the people who are making family photographs are the family members or the parents of the family. But to me, I was just so drawn to the fact that these were taken by like the eye of a child, and also like the eye of someone who, was at the same age as he was making these as I was when I started documenting, my best friend and my siblings and myself. So my grandfather, who's circled here in the red circle, I grew up in Rochester, which is the birthplace of Kodak, which has a huge part in the history of photography. And so my grandfather and my grandmother both worked for Kodak, and that's him in this employee group photo in the 1980s. And so part of his job and my grandmother's job, they would get to test new film stocks and new cameras for Kodak. And so a lot of these photographs we actually discovered after my grandfather had passed away. They were in a box of old slides. And to me, just like with my mother's family archive, I loved looking at these photographs, specifically the colors, and just the way that they would see each other and document each other, especially with their use of natural light, because that's pretty much all I use in my work as well. And just how through color and light, they really amplified the natural world around them and sort of created these really beautiful moments. And to me too, I'm really interested as well in what people include in the frame, like this image of my aunt at her first communion. I'm not sure why either my grandma or my grandfather included this family in the background that frames her in this really chaotic, strange way. But there's something just like so beautiful to these images to me that I love to go back to when, again, I'm looking for things to, jog my inspiration. So as I said, I started making photographs when I was about 15 or 16 years old, and for the first few years that I was making images, I was only photographing myself and my childhood best friend who lived down the street from me. So this is a very early self-portrait that was taken through the bottom window frame of my best friend's front door of her parents' house. And she and I would spend most of our time after school just making pictures, and we would go to thrift stores and like Goodwill, and we would find objects and, photograph them a million different times and see how we could make something look different or look the same. Like this old wedding dress we bought for like $15, and we would wear it and photograph each other, and then we would like throw it in the pool and see how it would move through water. And we just experimented a lot with, the very little budget that we had as teenagers, playing around a lot with light and what we could do there. This photograph I made before the start of my junior year of high school, and it was kind of like a pivotal image for me in sort of my career as an artist. I had submitted this to an awards program that's for high school students called Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, and it was my first time having my work acknowledged on a national level outside of my parents and my high school art teacher. And at the time of this award, I was given a little write-up in the local newspaper, and the journalist at the time had coined my work as the odd and the ordinary, and I thought that was just the most incredible phrase, and so I just sort of ran with it, and I used that as the basis of my image making anytime I went to go make a new photograph. And so it was around this time that I really decided that I wanted to make my life career as a photographer, and that's what I wanted to study and go to school for. But at that time, I still was really only photographing myself and my friend. And so my mom had told me that if you want to, make a career out of this, you need to learn how to photograph other people, because people will look at this book and think that you can only photograph, your friend or yourself. So you need to be able to work with other people. And so this was the body of work that I started making my senior year of high school to apply to college with. And I really like to show this work as kind of a way to just show you the general journey of my artistic practice and how far I've come through just prolifically shooting. But I was very fond of this work at the time that I made it, even though it's rather dated now and nothing I feel super connected to. But I was really convinced that I wanted to go to FIT and I wanted to be a fashion photographer, and that was kind of the trajectory that I saw for my life. And so I came here in 2011 to study photography here in the photography department at FIT. And it was really hard for me to adjust and to feel inspired to make work in this new environment that I was living in. I had grown up in a suburb that was very rural, and I could walk anywhere and find a field or woods or an abandoned house to make photographs in. But in New York City, it was far different for me. And so I struggled a lot my first year here at school, and contemplated for a while if I wanted to even live in New York. But after I pushed through that first year, I knew that this was the place that was right for me, and I found a way to adapt. And this was probably the first assignment that I received my freshman year of college that really pushed me forward in that. It was for my 35mm class with Professor Paris, and we were each given a small mirror that was 4x4, and he said, you can do anything you want, but the mirror has to be in the photograph in some way, shape, or form. And so this really sparked my love affair with reflections and trickery and optical illusions within my photography. And so I went to Chelsea Pierce Park with one of my friends, and I threw the mirror onto the ground, covering the edges with the grass around it, shooting on a shallow depth of field to kind of create this illusion of, are we underneath the ground? Is she in the ground? Are we sort of like this Alice in Wonderland, almost portal sort of effect? And I realized I can make work that is of this style that I so love in a place that doesn't actually look like it. I just have to really try and push myself. That's the only work I'm going to show from my freshman year of college here. And moving on into my sophomore year here was kind of the start of my first real long-term project. Around this time, I like my high school best friend, my childhood best friend who I photographed, she was my first muse. She was the one who inspired so much of my early work, but I had yet to really find someone like that again in my life, in my new life here in New York. And this was when I had met Max, who ended up being my first romantic relationship in life. And I was very intrigued in documenting those emotions that come along with young love, especially experiencing it for the first time. And he became my new muse in this alternative sort of way. We were both college students in different states, so this relationship was one of long distance. But every time we were with each other, we would just make work all the time. He was also an artist. And a lot of my work still, I like to call them staged realities, even if they look like a documentary photograph. Sure, these were real scenes that had happened at some point, I'm sure, but in the moment, these were things that I had staged and placed together to kind of showcase and document this relationship and this young love and really kind of infatuation from my side of things. I was experimenting a lot with the physical photograph, which I still do to this day, which I'll show more of later. But for me, this was something that was a really interesting way to kind of showcase entanglement and young love and different perspectives. And it was a very collaborative process as well. This was one of the last bodies of work that we had made with one another. He was here visiting me, and we kind of locked ourselves in my dorm room for a weekend and made this series on this peel-apart Polaroid film that Fuji used to make, where we would make these little scenes with a lot of this mirrors and reflective material, and we would take turns photographing one another in the same scenes, kind of as ways to depict the ways that we saw each other and how there were similarities and differences between that in either side of our relationship. And looking back on it, of course, with so much perspective, these were all made around 2012, 2013, I see a lot of longing and kind of looking at life through rose-colored glasses. And there's sort of this voyeuristic approach to it as well, because they are these staged realities where sometimes it's from my, first-person perspective, but then in other times it's, through a different space where it feels like you are someone who is watching this, relationship take place. And like most young love, it came to an end. And for me, I had spent so much of my time focused on making work about this relationship and about this person that I almost forgot to kind of focus on other interests and other, things outside of that. And so, now I'm experiencing heartache for the first time. And I want to find a way to work through that through art. And I didn't want it to feel super contrived or over the top. And so I waited and took some time, sitting with those emotions and trying to figure out how to display it in a visual sense. And it was later that summer, before I started my junior year, that my childhood best friend had given me an old photography textbook that she found at a thrift store. And I was sifting through it, and I found this page on double exposures that you could make with the Hasselblad camera, which is a medium format camera. And you could make it appear as though the body is disappearing into space. And I saw this, and I immediately knew, that's it. That is how I'm depicting this time in my life. And so I went out and I cast real-life couples to put together this body of work. I titled it Lacuna, which means a gap, but also it's inspired by the film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, if you know it. There's a company in the film called Lacuna Inc. that you can hire to erase your memories of a person. And that was very much what I was feeling at the time. But on top of that, I was also really interested, too, in thinking about photography and memory, which I like to think about a lot. So I would go into these spaces and I would stage these, realities between these couples within their own personal environment. I would photograph them and cover half of my camera lens. I would have them exit the scene, and then I would make my second exposure of the scene empty and void of any person to get this really beautiful effect of the bodies fading away into space. And so I was really interested in, like I said, photography and memory and how we can use photography to depict memory, especially because, with photography, we would like to think of it as sort of truth, but it isn't always 100% truth, I don't think. And with these images too, I'm thinking about my memories of this person and intimate moments that we shared within these spaces, and losing elements of it to time, but also I'm thinking as well about their new relationships, and kind of in my mind like ruminating and thinking about like what it must be like with them. So it's kind of this duality of like conjuring up these memories of him with someone else, but also losing the ones that I had of us together. So I like that sort of duality that exists within the project. None of these couples are together either, so I kind of like that as well, that all of this is really fleeting and lost to time. And so with this project and the next one I'm going to show is just examples of how personal work is like always the most important work you're ever going to make, and oftentimes it's what leads to paid work in the end. And so the year that I graduated school, I went to a portfolio review later that year, and I met an editor from Bloomberg Business Week, and she had seen that project Lacuna. She loved it, and so she hired me to do a spread of handbags and books with disappearing hands for one of their issues of the magazine, which was a really exciting and my first editorial gig that I got. So the next and the last body of work I'm going to show from my time at FIT is probably the one that's been the most lucrative for me in terms of a working artist, and is one that's very special to me. So that's me in my dorm room on the left, and that shiny piece of paper on the wall is a very beat up piece of Mylar, which is like a funhouse smear material. And when I was a student here, Professor Willocks gave me that sheet of Mylar, and he said, I think that you'll really like this, and I think that you could do something really interesting with it. And so I brought it home with me for Christmas break that year, and I made these portraits of my sister on the right, and I immediately just fell in love. I thought that it was just like the most magical, beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I felt like I was making a painting with a camera, and that really excited me. And so I came back after Christmas break, and I tacked that back up on my dorm room wall, and I would have my friends come over, and I would make these portraits of them in my dorm room. And it was really fun to kind of just have this like experimental body of work. But it wasn't until like a few months after the fact I had carried it around with me to most shoots that I would go on. And I was collaborating with a florist, and I had tacked it on the wall in her studio, and she just pushed a bucket of flowers in front of it. And immediately I was like, I'm not photographing people in this anymore. Like, it's going to be flowers from here on out. And I just fell in love with the process, and it was something that I just kept on doing and making more of. Whenever I would have some money, I would go to the Flower District, which is right across the street on 28th Street, across from FIT, and I would buy some flowers and I would make new work. And it ended up being the first job that I ever got outside of college. Was about a month after I graduated, and I was hired by someone working for Samsung Mobile to photograph a bunch of different floral arrangements using my liquid mirrors technique, which is what I call this body of work, and just utilizing like their phones and documenting kind of like how great the phone was, the phone camera was. So it was an interesting way to kind of work with this project, and my first kind of foray into the freelancing world, getting my first job, again, inspired by my personal work. So again, like I said, I would make new work for this every time I would have some extra money to buy some flowers, and I would just sit in the corner in my apartment and I would make work for hours. Because of the nature of the process, I could, move the piece of Mylar and have an entirely new composition and photograph in front of me. And so oftentimes when I'm making this work, it's sort of hard for me to stop because it's so easy to just like continually make beautiful things. Another thing I really think is important that I like to mention to students is it's really, really imperative that you keep in touch with not only your professors, but also guest speakers that come into your class, because you never know what that could lead to for you in the future. So when I was a junior here, when I was making this work, my professor, Allison Wade, brought in one of her friends who started this online art dealership, sort of this like boutique art dealership called Art Star. Her name's Chrissy Crawford. And unbeknownst to me, after the class, Allison had introduced Chrissy to my work and said, I think you should keep an eye on her. And so a year after I graduated school, Chrissy reached out to me to offer to sell exclusively this body of work, and I of course said yes. And it's been incredible passive income for me over the years, where they've placed my work in private collections in people's homes, but also more high-end buildings and hotels and establishments that otherwise like I would not be able to achieve on my own through lack of connections, and also the printing and the framing that they have access to. A really cool I've always been really interested in like television and film and movies and like how the art gets placed that's in these scenes. And I think this was in like maybe 2020 or so. There was a show on Showtime called Ray Donovan that I didn't watch, but my parents did. But they had reached out to ArtStar inquiring about one of my pieces that they wanted to place in one of like the major sets for that specific season. And so I watched an entire season of the show out of context just so I could always take a screenshot and catch my photograph whenever it was on one of the walls, which I thought was a really, really interesting way to kind of like have my work placed. This was some work that I made last summer for this online shopping site called ShopOp. So they had hired me to create an entirely new sort of section of the series that they could use as supplemental imagery for their fall campaign. So they used it on social and on web as placement for behind their campaign images, which was just a really exciting way to work on the project as well. This was a new way for me to get hired to make new work, and to me it was really fun because they gave me total creative control to just have fun and just make these new images by myself. Oftentimes when you're working with a huge brand, there will be a lot of people on the set around you watching you as you work, but they allowed me to like work alone by myself in my studio for a whole day, and I came out with like a ton of images I'm super proud of. This year was also like a really exciting year for this project. So when I was in high school, another awards program that I became an alumni of is called Young Arts. So it's for artists of all disciplines, ages 15 to 18. And they have an incredibly robust alumni program. They hold galas every single year in New York and Miami to raise money for the foundation. And this year they used my work as images, to supplement the design and also like the invitations and stuff like that for the gala. They held the New York gala at the Met, and about 2 or 3 days before the gala itself, they had asked permission for me if they could project my work on the grand staircase of the Met. And it's just a projection, but to me it was kind of like, I never really cry happy tears, but this was like the one moment in my life I like cried happy tears in terms of my work. Just to see my work interacting in a space that means so much to me, and my time here in New York was really incredible. And then on the right, that's the same image projected on the wall in the Temple Room at the Met. Young Arts also has, like I said, their alumni program is very robust, and one of their huge sponsors is Anthropology, and this is their 3rd year with this award program that they run with them, but they grant 5 of their alumni an unrestricted grant of $10,000 and then the opportunity to sell their work for a year on the Anthropology platform. And I was very, very lucky and blessed to be the recipient of that award this year. And so this is another thing that I've accomplished thus far this year alone with this body of work. And I'm just very grateful to my younger 19, 20-year-old self for starting this project in my dorm room, because I never could have imagined where this would have taken me and how 12, 13 years later, it is still a part of my life. And so I think it's really important to show just like the stuff that you create here and you start working on could really carry you like so far. So always focus on the personal work. The next 3 projects I'm going to show I created after I graduated FIT, like the few years after I graduated. I'm going to show the inspiration and then the subsequent body of work for each of them. And so the first body of work is one that I started making immediately after graduating, like within a few weeks. And it's inspired by this painting by Andrew Wyeth called Christina's World, which I'm sure most of you have probably seen. But something I really love about this painting is that the title of the work was actually given to it by Wyeth's wife and not Andrew Wyeth himself. And it indicates that the painting is more of a psychological landscape than a portrait. It's a portrayal of a state of mind rather than a place. And so upon graduating, I felt very lost. I knew I wanted to make a living off of photography, but I didn't really know how to do it. I felt like I had learned a lot in school, but the one thing I wanted to know the most was, okay, well, how do I make money just off of my photos alone? And I felt like I didn't really have the answer to that, and truthfully, I don't even know if that's something that can be taught. I think it's something that you just have to, each of you, figure out on your own journey through your own experience post, graduating. So I had gone home to visit my family, and there was this house up the road from my parents that was about to be demolished for commercial real estate, and it was teetering on this hill of dirt with mounds of dirt all around it. And to me, it felt very like reminiscent of the house from The Wizard of Oz, minus all the colors around it. And initially, I wanted to make portraits or photographs of my sister here, but she's very by the book and wanted to follow the rules and felt like this was trespassing. And so I had just been like, all right, my mom is just going to help me take these photos of myself as my human tripod. And so I set up the scene, and my mom helped me take these self-portraits. And it wasn't until I looked back on them afterwards that I felt such a connection to what was going on inside my mind at the time, and like my nervous system with this house and this landscape and this location. And so this was the inspiration to start a series of self-portraits almost as a way to kind of give myself assignments, because I was so used to, for 4 years, being given assignments by my professors and using that as a means to make my work. But now suddenly there's no one here telling me to make work. It's all on me to make the work. In and of itself. And so it was very important for me to do that, to give myself these assignments. And so I carried this dress around with me whenever I would go on a trip with my friends or a shoot or visiting my family. And I felt like I was kind of like on the edge of like holding on to this sort of youth-like, childhood nature with like no responsibilities, and then also like the precipice of like true adulthood and being on your own in the real world. And I felt like, the pattern of this dress kind of was reminiscent of the childhood and sort of this like searching for something that, I wasn't actually going to find. I just had to keep making the work and keep just trusting that everything was going to work out. This was the last image that I made in the series, and it was across the street from my Nana's house, actually, in this abandoned farmer's field that was full of dandelions for as far as the eye could see, and my mom also helped me take this one as my human tripod, and I felt like it was really kind of a full circle moment, ending this series on an image that's full of more color than the others, and also a bit more hopeful, and of course there's the nod to Christina's world in the posing as well in this image, but it's also kind of like coming back to the roots of where I started making images in the first place, in my hometown and in my Nana's yard. And eventually I knew that this was kind of the end, and I had felt like I had worked through my feelings enough on the matter to know when to stop. And so that's that first project. The next is one that's inspired by a photograph by Irving Penn called Summer Sleep, which is one of my favorite photographs. And I'm really interested in layering in my work and always like putting things in front of my lens and seeing how it affects the photograph. And so I wanted to make an homage to this image by Irving Penn. And so I bought a window screen at a 99-cent store, and I shot on 2 different dates, one with a model, one of my friends, and then one just kind of a still life of roses in the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. And when I was making these images, I was thinking a lot, again, about memory and photography and how it aids or abets that process, and how do we personify memory through a photograph. I wanted these to be really sort of voyeuristic and, kind of hazy, like they are this sort of memory from a past time in our life. And I would carry around a bottle of water, and I would pour it on the screen, and then I would flick the screen so that the pattern of the water would be different on every single one of the photographs. And for me, I loved how like wherever the water is, it's void of whatever color is behind it. So for me, it's kind of like breaking down a memory into these building blocks, and there's these pieces that that fall away to time, and that's what it's personified through those little specks of water on the screen. And it was a great practice too in making photographs in more of a geometric way compositionally and thinking about line and shape and color, because my main focus and my main subject matter is entirely out of focus in these images. And then this last image here is one of my favorites. I wanted to do like a real sort of nod to Irving Penn, and a few days before I started making these photographs, I was just walking on the street, and there was this dead bumblebee just perfectly on the sidewalk, and I had a little bag in my purse that I picked up the bee and put it in my bag. And so that's my nod to Irving Penn. So, and that's also a note to always just be looking, whether it's up or down, side to side, to find things, for your images or to find inspiration. And then the last body of work in this section that I'm going to show is inspired by something that's not beautiful at all, but trash. And so, you can find inspiration anywhere, I truly think. And for me, I had seen this, old grocery store flyer on the sidewalk, and I thought that there was something so beautiful about it. And I knew that one day I wanted to make a body of work of my own with my own photographs, sort of utilizing this technique. But something that's really important for me in as much of my work as possible is to make sure that the medium is the message in some way, shape, or form. So I want to make sure that there's a purpose behind why I'm doing something to my photograph, whether it be the double exposures or whether it be the water specks on the screen. And so it took me a while to kind of figure out what the medium and the message was here. Well, I knew the medium, but more so what the message was. And I made these, I think, around the summer of 2018 or so. And it was kind of the first time ever in my life since I started making photographs that I felt rather uninspired and didn't really know what to make images of. And so I started thinking about maybe like what it was that was uninspiring me or causing me to get stuck. And I started thinking more in depth about social media and the detrimental effects it has not only on an artist, but also as us as humans. And so I went through my Instagram account and I had pulled off the images that were deemed the most liked by the public that followed me, and I made newsprints of them. And then outside my apartment, I adhered them to the sidewalk with water, and I walked across them, I dragged my foot across them, and I rephotographed them to personify sort of what it would look like if this, infinite scroll was this physical thing that thousands of people are touching and zooming in on and sharing and saving. What would it look like if, hundreds or thousands of people were physically touching it? And so for me, it was like a really cathartic process to make new work out of my old work that maybe I'd felt like sort of a detachment from. And I ended up printing these in like a big newspaper in and of itself. So it kind of lived multiple different lives. And that was, another thing that was just really important to me is to wait until it was the right time and the right message for, the concept or the medium I wanted to try out. Coming a little bit more forward, something that also is really important to my practice that I've found is artist residencies. So if you don't know what an artist residency is, it is a place, whether it be anywhere here in the States or worldwide, where you can apply or sometimes be invited to go and make work. And so for a long time, I felt like I wasn't necessarily ready for an artist residency. Maybe that I felt like I wasn't talented enough yet or something, or getting tripped up in my head that I had to be a certain stage in my career to be ready for an artist residency, which is not true. You can do it at any time. But I had found this residency on Instagram, and it was in France, and it didn't seem real to me, but I applied in the end of 2019. I got in January of 2020, and I was supposed to go in August of 2020, and then we all know what happened. And so I didn't end up going to this residency for 2 years, and I'm grateful every single day. Like, obviously, I'm not really grateful for the pandemic, but I'm very grateful that I had to wait to go here, because the work that I made would not have existed had I gone in 2020 or had I gone in 2021. And it's some of the work that I'm the most proud of that I've ever made in my life. And so this was my studio space there, which was out of this world. I had to share it with one other artist, and we were definitely the luckiest in terms of the spaces that we got. The name of the residency is Chateau Orcrevaux, and it's in this really tiny village where maybe like 70 people live, 3 hours northeast of Paris. And going into it, I didn't really have an idea for a project necessarily. I had images that I knew I wanted to make because I spent the pandemic years going online on their website, on Google Maps, walking the streets of this village, just trying to kind of like imagine the images that I wanted to make when I could finally be there. So it was kind of like a really good place for me to kind of dream during the pandemic and something to look forward to. This was initially conceptualized as a series of self-portraits because I didn't know the people who would be there, and we were only going to be there for 2 weeks. I made this whole body of work in 10 days, and I didn't want to take anyone from their work, but I soon realized that all of the images I wanted to make, it wasn't going to be possible to do it all on my own, and I would share my work with the other women I was there with, because this residency, my group at least, ended up being a group of all women. And so for me, it was really, fun to play around with other artists and incorporating them into my work. And then it was when I came home from this this experience that I started looking at the work and really thinking about what it meant to me, because I was reflecting on what I was subconsciously and very consciously going through in my life, which was kind of coming towards the end of a very long codependent toxic relationship. And this experience allowed me to really separate myself, by an ocean and by a time difference of thousands of miles from my life, and realizing that this sort of like independence and the sacredness of being alone within your body was something that wasn't daunting at all, and something that was honestly so liberating for me. And in order to, experience this, I had to really confront a lot of things about my life and myself. And I was at this residency, like I said, with a group of women from ages 23 to 70. And so I was able to learn, so much about what these other women had experienced in their life, whether it be, change in careers, divorce, children, things that I have yet to experience, and how, there's nothing daunting sort of about this like independence and choosing yourself. A lot of times in this work, I was subconsciously working a lot in like threes, thinking a lot about like past, present, and future, but also harmony. I really love the number 3. And interspersed throughout the body of work are a lot of these kind of like anxious tableaus of these still lives as well, because I was thinking a lot about sort of how nuanced the journey of self-growth is, and how uncertain it is as well. So all of these photographs are of course inspired by painting as well. All are made with natural light, which is really important to me. And water is also very important to this body of work as well. And so all of the water in these photographs are all connected to one another. So this image in particular is taken towards the source of the water for the village. And so this feeds through all of the images in this body of work are all connected to this one area. And so I'm also thinking a lot about rebirth and cleansing, and also just like light and what that sort of possesses and can bring to us. And then this is the final image in the sequence of the series that's a self-portrait that I took. And something that's really important to my work is I'll never ask someone to do something that I also won't do in my work. And so for me, that was very vulnerable to make a self-portrait like this. But it was something that was very liberating and freeing. And I think there's still something about this photograph too, though, that while it is very, out in the open and I'm kind of letting it all lay bare, it's still, hidden and protected and hidden away in this underground sort of tunnel with this waterfall. So there's still sort of more to come in terms of the journey of self-growth. And just to kind of speed through this, at the end of the residency, we all got to have like an open studio where we would share our work that we made during our time there. And so this was kind of how I displayed the work, just everything laid out on a table with elements that I found, on the grounds or in the village here at the residency. And so for me, it's really fun to play around a lot with like the physical print and also objects and how they can interact and sort of amplify, the story that you're telling through your body of work. And like I talked about a bit during my journaling presentation, I'm not someone who likes to sketch. So for me, I was walking around with my phone at all times there, just taking pictures to log the time of day, and kind of use it as a preliminary sketch for like how I wanted to compose my photographs and where I wanted to plop a person down. So like this one in particular, this was never one that I could have planned ahead of time by going on the internet. So this was like during one of my morning walks, the light would come through the trees and hit the water between 11 and 11:30 in the morning every day. And so I knew I needed to make this photograph at that time. And so it was a great way for me to keep track and pace myself through the image making, because unlike other artists who were there, anything that I started there, I needed to finish there, because all of my work that I was making at this residency was about this place and occupying this place. When other people could do a painting and then bring it home with them or do a sketch and complete it at home, I needed to complete everything while I was there that I wanted to make. Just gonna flip through these. And then I did another residency last year for 5 weeks in Colorado, which was a very different experience. It was in March and April in the mountains of Aspen and very cold and very different. And I didn't make as prolific of a body of work as I did at the France residency, which in retrospect I think is totally fine and important. Sometimes as an artist, you just need time to rest and make new relationships with other artists, which is what I spent most of this residency doing. But I started experimenting with a different process called UV printing, which uses a UV printer and UV light to print on any surface that you wish. And so I brought my collection of pressed orchids, and then I have these old photographs that I found, or these old negatives that I found at a flea market that were made by a photographer in the 1940s or 50s of a model in his studio. And she is nude and has these beautiful like nature textures projected onto her. And so I printed these film negatives that I scanned onto these old orchids, and they're very delicate, they're thinner than paper. And I photographed these by pushing them between two pieces of plexiglass and holding them up towards the sky so that you could get the light reflecting through them. But this really sort of sparked in me, something else I want to continue on. It's nothing that's, fully fleshed out yet, but it's something that I'm really excited about and wanting to explore more. And this is some other work. So I don't work entirely in series. I do a lot of one-off shoots as well with models or friends. I've been experimenting a lot with, again, the physical photograph and layering on top of it and re-photographing my work. So these were bugs that I actually collected during my residency in France, and I was very inspired by my childhood with paper dolls and my Nana, so I wanted to make sort of paper dolls out of bugs for clothes. I play around a lot recently with printing on old papers. So these are old papers from a vintage children's book from the 1800s. And I just love how the illustrations are interacting with the models, like this old technology meets new technology. This one in particular was a shoot I did with my friend earlier this year to document her first pregnancy. And this one I felt was a perfect illustration to go along with her. And again, this is elaborating too on the bugs for clothes, but with pressed flowers. So I really love kind of like making these, fleeting ephemeral collages that are just made for the photograph in and of itself, and then I, wipe it away, and it's not a physical thing. This is some more work, more printing on old paper. I do a lot of rephotographing my portraits through gels to kind of create these really beautiful, surreal portraits. And so I'm just going to kind of flip through this body of work. These are just, again, like I mentioned, my sort of one-off images, but I'll just flip through these. And if you all want to ask me any questions, that's like the end of the talk necessarily, but I'm open to answering any questions. Yes. Yeah.
What was the printing called that you did on the orchids?
UV printing. So there are labs across the city that have UV printers. Because I was at a residency, they kind of let me do whatever I want. I'm unsure if labs in the city would let me do it on the flowers, but you're kind of able to print on anything you want. Yeah. 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 Yeah, you're right there. Yeah.
I was just wondering with the residency, you're so far from Colorado, right?
Yeah.
I was just wondering mentally, what is that experience for you as an artist?
To me, I really love it. I think something that makes living in New York for me sustainable as a person and as an artist is leaving and coming back. And to me, it keeps me really fresh and inspired, because something about like routine for me, it really kind of, I feel like it stifles my creativity. And so being able to leave and see a new place and meet a new group of artists is really important, because after you leave the school environment, you don't have, the built-in community that you have here at school. And so the one thing that they always tell us before graduating is like, don't make work in a vacuum. And so you want to make sure that you're making work and you're having access to other people to do like crit groups or just to show it and have feedback from. So being able to go to a residency and meet an entirely new group of people, I haven't done a ton, I've done like 3, but they have always like been so beneficial to my practice and to my life. Yeah. Yeah, right there. Yeah, you.
How do you feel about inspiring models, especially for such an intimate setting like a couple project?
Yeah, so a lot of the times, like back then, we would use Facebook more frequently, and so I would advertise on there, but now it's more so Instagram. So just making like an Instagram story and just like doing like a casting call or in search of models. A lot of the times, a lot of the women who, because I primarily photograph women, but a lot of the women that I photograph are models who I've met like on other shoots that I become friends with or meeting just through social media. You can reach out to modeling agencies specifically to shoot for their development boards, which are their boards of like their models who are newer and need more work for their portfolios. So it's easier to get shoots with them versus models on their main boards. So I would always go that way if you're looking to work with agency models. But if you're looking for models who are like a bit more green, like which means just like newer, I would say just like doing, reaching out to people on Instagram or doing casting calls that way just through your story. Yeah. Another question? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to have this slideshow on the week 5 site, and so you guys can click through and look back at the slides. I have a scan of the page that's in it, but you have to use a Hasselblad medium format camera. I'm not sure if freshmen are able to take them out. You might just have to ask for special permission to do that. But you can take the film in a Hasselblad sits in a magazine, which you can remove from the body of the camera, and so it's just about putting the dark slide back in, removing the magazine to advance your camera so it doesn't advance the film, and then putting the magazine back on to do your second frame. You cover half of your lens, and then you like feather and cover the opposite half of the lens. It shows on the page in the slideshow, it shows an illustration of how to do it. Yeah. Any other questions? Someone over here. Oh, yes, hi.
You mentioned the connections and I feel like this place is very like high and bad, like, oh my god, I love Europe, and like everybody like believes in each other's opinion. So I guess like how do you build that connection, especially with somebody that like is older than you, like and more established in their career? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's just about like staying in touch over email and like asking to like grab a coffee with someone is something as simple as that, or like to do a studio visit if they have a studio and you want to like go and see their work. A lot of times people like to be flattered and complimented, so like sending a very like flattering email has like helped me accomplish a lot or get a lot of, artists who I am really inspired by to, give me some of their time. So I think it's all just about like staying in touch and being persistent, but like not too persistent. You don't want to annoy someone, but just staying in touch and emailing and just asking for a little bit of their time, I would say. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
The picture you showed maybe like 2 slides ago, where it's like the 3 years.
Oh yeah.
I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, so one of my favorite stores is called Canal Plastics. It's in Chinatown, and they have a lot of little mirrors there, a bunch of different colors. And so I used to have a whole bag full of them, but I think I left it here at FIT one summer, and it's now gone forever. But I just taped these 3 mirrors to the wall in my studio and photographed the reflection of this model in them using a shallow depth of field to kind of blur the edges of the frame of the mirrors. And she's standing a little bit away from the wall, so that's why the focus is like a little bit farther in depth. Yeah. The mirrors are colored in and of themselves. So they sell a bunch of different colored mirrors there. So these were just like the colors of the mirrors that I bought. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you.
So, like, it's very obvious how much you look after light in your work.
Yeah.
I was wondering with your studio shoots, do you incorporate after light like there as well, or do you use studio lenses?
Yeah, so all of my work is natural light. In my studio that I have is entirely a daylight space. It has a beautiful wall of like east-facing window, like northeast-facing windows. I would say though it's very important to learn how to light your images with strobes and artificial lights, whether it be continuous lights as well. That's one thing that I would say that I kind of beat myself up as a student here is not really paying attention in lighting class. And it's very important, especially working commercially and editorially. It's very helpful to know how to do it yourself and not always having to rely on assistant, which sometimes I have to do. But yeah, all of my work is just utilizing natural light, whether it's found continuous light like this one, or kind of making my own light. Like this one is different. This I made lighting it entirely with candles. So I'm a little DIY in my work, but I really, highly recommend shooting and learning when you guys have the lighting classes to really focus on learning how to light your images. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So my mom was a nanny for a lot of years, and so those were children that she nannied, so they were kind of like my other sisters. So a lot of the people in the work are just like friends that I've met or models who have reached out to me or I've reached out to over time, or are people who are like adjacent to my family. Yeah. Okay. All right, I'll take one last question. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you again. Yeah.
How much of your photos would you say have like digital editing in them? Like I saw like with the bug paper dolls, you use like a lot of like physical editing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering if you like do color grading or like.
So all of my work, I do my own color grading and like retouching the skin, but one thing about my work that I kind of forgot to mention is everything that you see is what I saw. So I don't do any editing in Photoshop that's like compositing at all. Everything you see is what I saw. So like anything that's sort of melting or with the flowers, that was me making a print of a photograph and then arranging the flowers on the piece of paper and re-photographing it. So everything is done entirely in the camera, and that's always something that's been really important to me in my work, and also just because I don't feel that strongly as a compositing Photoshopper. But everything that I do is in the camera, so you see what I saw. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stay after class if any of you have any extra questions. I'm going to put mine and Pacifico's attendance up here to come and sign. Thanks, Leticia. Thanks, guys.